around about this time in 1995, me and my mate Nigel James sat in a farmhouse on Caerphilly Mountain, and we were about to start a ministry that was going to be starting in September. And we were praying to God, and we believed at that point that God said two things to us. One is from 2 Timothy chapter 4, in which there's lots of good stuff, but there is that kind of, I give you this charge, preach the word. It is like being a single most significant phrase that's ever been over my ministry. Do the work of an evangelist, in season, out of season, all that good stuff. And the other thing that we believe that God said to us was that this generation would see the greatest move of God the nation has ever seen. This generation would see the greatest move of God this nation has ever seen. And if you go into the Message Wales office, that's actually on the wall. That statement is on the wall as a kind of declaration of belief. And pretty much every day I've got up with that thought and that belief. And yet, during that whole period, the church has actually been in decline in the West, and particularly in the UK, and particularly amongst young people. And all sorts of different things and ideas and thoughts of and schemes and programs and plans have been put in place, and yet the decline has continued. And we're at a point right now where, despite everything we've ever experienced in recent years, the trend has changed. And it's quite remarkable. And I think it's important for us who are, as a missions organization, that we grasp not just this opportunity, but grasp this truth and actually operate at the confidence that God has given us. There was a piece of research done by an academic that was published in the Times about 4 or 5 months ago, where this academic called Christopher Gasson did a survey, and the publication of the survey was that Gen Z were the most open to the gospel of any generation in living memory, certainly since the Second World War. And it seems actually as intellectuals, as society generally, has been suggesting in overt terms that God does not exist. The young are refuting it. They're having an openness and an experience that society tells them doesn't make sense, and it's suddenly grasping it's getting a focus from those people. What is actually going on? I come from a generation called the baby boomers, and only 38% of baby boomers would define themselves as spiritual. And actually, once you get rid of crystals and horoscopes and all the New Age stuff, the numbers that would identify of there being a God, and certainly the God that we would recognize, is tiny. And yet, by far the majority of Gen Z, more than 60%, believe not just in spiritual things, but in the existence of God. Now, at a time when young people are facing incalculable difficulties, really, mental health stats are off the charts, we know that. They need to know Jesus more than ever before. They're open for it. And yet, one of the things, and I think genuinely, as I was preparing this, felt this is something we need to be contending in prayer for. As the openness to the gospel has never been greater, the access to sharing the gospel with young people is reducing, isn't it? We have that experience. We've always said, the doors to schools are wide open to us. And yet, in the last year or so, we begin to see doors close. As we've actually sought to bring programs that are directly in line with the curriculum, perhaps more than any time before, and yet opportunities to preach the gospel are actually reducing. And I feel like that's something that we need to be contending with in prayer. Because if we know that the young people are open to the gospel, the devil's going to do everything he can to stop them hearing it, isn't he? So that for the first time in my life, the church is growing. And certainly for the first time it's growing amongst young people and young men. None of that humanly makes sense. We have to recognize that God is front and center in making this happen. The other encouraging thing to say, by the way, is both Barna and Pew, which big research companies, have recognized that 96% of people come to faith under the age of 30. 96%. And yet, look where the church invests most of its resources. It's in the 4%. 96%. And by far the vast majority of those come to faith under the age of 18, right in our sweet spot. I also remember, and we will all, I guess, have been aware of, if not been part of Soul Survivor. I went to Soul Survivor for a number of years, from speaking at it to helping cooking at it to all sorts of different aspects of it. And it was an amazing experience to be at. But I would say my experience of it was this. It very much felt like a bless me culture. That we would go and 30-odd thousand of us would turn up in the marquee and worship God, and it was great, but it was like, God bless me. God bless me. And if I was to look at the missional output of it, that was always my concern as I was working with young people. What difference is it making, not just in their experience when they're there, but in their lives and for the sake of the kingdom? And there's something about what's going on at the moment where actually what we're seeing is young people coming to faith and immediately saying, how do I bless others? They might not use that language, but they're saying, how can I tell other people about this? And isn't it interesting that we've developed the charge and the scattering at such a time as this, that actually we've got a response and a resource to this. One of the reasons I felt I wanted to talk about this was because I recognize that amongst any group of adults and humans, sometimes when we hear this stuff, if we're not careful, we can be a little bit cynical. Let me be honest with you. So just before Easter, my church says we're not going to meet in church on Easter Sunday. We're going to Barry Island and we're going to baptize people. Right? I've got to tell you, I was deeply cynical about that. I'm like, why would a church not meet in church on Easter Sunday? We're all just going to go and have a bit of a bless me time down Barry Island and, baptize some people, And I actually didn't just say it to myself. I said it to my wife. I managed to contain my cynicism beyond that. When we went down to Barry Island, we had less people than we would normally have coming to church, so already I was like feeling, completely justified in my thinking. And we went and we baptized, prepared to baptize 6 people. And the pastors of the church had actually brought an extra towel for if anybody else wanted to get baptized. And they asked me to hold the towels. Happy to do that, So we went down to the sea. And I've got the 7th towel, and the pastor says, we're going to need that 7th towel. And I was like, well, man of faith, fantastic. I said, oh, right, okay. And he said, yeah, the guy on the coffee cart, last time we were here, his brother came to faith when he heard me preaching. And as a result of that, his wife has been a Christian for years. He then went on an Alpha course, and he's just heard us worshiping. And he said, is there any chance I can get baptized today? So we baptized this 7th person. And honestly, God works in mysterious ways, and he's blessing all sorts of people at the same and speaking to people at the same time. He was speaking to me at that moment as well, saying, how's your cynicism working out for you now then, Gary? The waste of time. Well, somebody came to faith you didn't even know about last time you were here. Nobody else knew about as it goes. And somebody else got baptized. See, here's the thing about cynicism, a curse of the age, is it only damages you. It doesn't damage anybody else. If it damages anybody else, that's kind of sarcasm, isn't it, when you're trying to have a go? But cynicism is just, it's just a hook on your own heart. And so when you listen to things about this quiet revival, you might go, yeah, well, whatever. My friend he's a Christian, he's a minister, and he's an academic. He approached all the research with that thing, I understand how they write these reports. And I met with him and I said, did you read the report? He said, yeah, I read every bit of it. He said, and all the things that I knew that they would have covered up to present it in such a way, he said, it's rigorous. He said, they answered all the questions. It is real. Why is this important? Well, because, as I say, I think sometimes we think, I don't see it, or I've not experienced it, or we're not seeing it in my church. Could it be true? Well, I want to suggest to you that it is. I want to suggest to you that even if you've not seen it, you should step into this. It's what God is doing. The Bible tells us in 1 Corinthians chapter 3 and verse 9, we are co-workers in God's service. You are God's field and God's building. We need to co-labor with God. The Bible goes on to say in 2 Corinthians chapter 6, as God's co-workers, we urge you not to receive God's grace in vain. For he says, in the time of favor I heard you, and in the day of salvation I helped you. I tell you, now is the time of God's favor. Now is the day of salvation. Years and years ago, I did a project, and I went to talk to all the churches in the city where I live. And I said, we're going to do this project. It's going to be the biggest project I've ever done. Are you with me? And the church leaders said yes. And I said, could you start sending us money so we can get on with it? And a week later, the first check arrived, and it arrived from one of the big partner churches that we had, and it was a £100,000 project. And I opened the envelope, and I got a check out. It tells you how many years ago it was. I got the check out, and in the check was for £25. £25. I was devastated. I was so distraught. I was like, this is not going to get it done. And I felt a check in my spirit at that point. It was like, well, you got £25 more this morning than you had when you came into work. So I was like, okay. Well, I was about to do this with the team I had at the time and opened the Bible, and I thought, what do I do with this? And I took it in. I said, guys, great news. We've had our first check. It's amazing. God is already at work. And this is a seed that we're going to pray around and see what God does. Well, you can imagine the story. Every bill was paid. We saw hundreds of people come to faith. And we had a choice at that time, didn't we, to be going, well, that's not very much. Or we can say, no, there's evidence that God is at work, and we need to have faith in him. And so I want to encourage you. I want to encourage you to be focused, faithful, and full of faith, if you like, that this is something that we are living in, something that we're going to experience. When Jesus told his disciples to go in the Great Commission, it was a command. It wasn't a suggestion. And as his 21st century representative, as his disciples now, he's saying, go. Now, I believe, and I've said this many times, that revival is a sovereign act. It's something only God can do. But evangelism, mission, is an act of obedience, where us as grateful children acknowledge his grace and are propelled into sharing the good news that we've received. And by the way, there's a plan for it. Ephesians 2 says, we are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do. And there is no better work than to share the gospel with people. What's the worst that could happen? Is people could say no, and you might feel rejected. Well, I want to tell you that if that's what happens to you, you'll be in good company. Christ himself was rejected. And yet, there's never been more evidence that people are more likely to say yes. So what does that look like? We all know that famous section of the Bible in Romans 19 where it says, how then can they call on the one they have not believed in? And how can they believe in the one that they have not heard? And how can they hear without someone preaching to them? And how can anyone preach unless they are sent? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news. Good news, the good news of Jesus. So I just want to encourage you that if you feel like, oh, that's great, but you know, I'm not on the front line. I'm not an evangelist. This is the work for all of us. It doesn't matter what you do. You see, I read the Sunday Times Rich List this week, and one of the things that is in it is the biggest givers, the list of the biggest givers. And what is remarkable is if you look at the list of the biggest givers, most of them are giving less than 1 or 2%. They're giving less than 1 or 2%. And we know that in the kingdom, they're not going to be any better thought of than the widow who gave from her lack. She did what she could. We're all called to do what we can. And God sees your obedience. God sees your faltering lips and your faltering presentation. And he takes that 5 loaves and 2 fishes and he turns it into a banquet. He can use you. Always be prepared to give an answer for the one who asks you, to give reasons for the hope that you have. Are you prepared? Are you prepared today to share? And by the way, we've got tools. If you're not, we could join an advanced group. Even if you are, join an advanced group. Even if you can't find an advanced group, go alongside somebody else who's good at this stuff and hang out with them. But have a go. Be part of it. Be part of this quiet revival. Be part of what God is up to. There is a window of opportunity. And maybe this lasts until when Jesus comes back. Or maybe it actually closes next week. We want to be part of it, don't we? We want to be part of what God is doing. Not just for, going, oh, it's great, I'm part of the message, and Ben Jack went out and preached somewhere. That's brilliant. But actually, we've all got our own part to play.